1, Chapter 1, The Beginning. The protagonist wakes up in a dark room and can't understand what's going on. He hears strange sounds and feels like someone is watching him. Chapter 1, The Beginning. Kay opened his eyes. There was darkness all around, so thick that it seemed he could touch it with his hands. His breathing was rapid, and his head was heavy. He couldn't remember how he got here. Lying on the cold, hard floor, he tried to put his thoughts in order, but instead he felt goosebumps running across his skin. Strange sounds were heard from behind the walls, either grinding or whispering. Every rustle, every turn of the air seemed ominous and unfamiliar. He sat up, and at that very second someone, or something, froze in the very depths of the room. He couldn't figure out where the whisper was coming from, but the feeling of being watched was unbearably strong. His fingers clenched into fists from anxiety, and he tried to stand up. But his legs wouldn't obey him, and every movement brought pain, as if his body wasn't his own. His eyes aren't used to the darkness yet, but something is moving in one corner of the room. He whirled around, but saw nothing, only a cold void. What is this place? He whispered under his breath, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was growing in him with every passing moment. Chapter 2. Kay recalls that once upon a time he lived in this house and he had mental problems. He begins to realize that everything he sees and hears is connected to his past. In the darkness, surrounded by silence, Kay suddenly felt something familiar. His heart sank, and memories began to pour out like water from a broken barrel. This house. He was familiar, though unbearably alien. Every crack in the walls, every smell coming from the cold stone floor, it was all part of his past. He remembered how many years ago he had lived here. It seems that it was in another life, and everything looked different. At that time, his psyche was so fragile that reality was mixed with nightmares. Many times he tried to find a way out of this vicious circle, but everything came back. Flashes of pain, fears, distorted images, all of them came back now, like living demons from forgotten nightmares. In his mind's eye, he began to unravel what was going on. The same rustling and strange noises he'd heard didn't seem random anymore. It all had to do with his past, with what he was trying to forget. He realized that the house wasn't just a building. It was more than that, a place where his consciousness had collided with the limits of perception, where his inner fears had come alive and were now watching him. He saw strange shapes, shadows, and heard whispers that seemed so familiar. He tried to remember what it meant, but he was too weak. This isn't just a hallucination, he thought. It's more than that. I'm here again because I need to understand what happened. Remembering some moments from his past, Kay felt everything around him become unbearably close. All those shadows, all those voices, they were part of his mind. But if that's the case, then what is the real thing and what is the fruit of his sick mind? Chapter 3. Kay begins to experience fear and panic. He tries to get out of the room, but the doors are closed. He realizes that he is trapped and needs to find a way out. The fear grew stronger with every passing moment. The air in the room was getting heavier, and my heart was beating so hard in my chest that it felt like it was going to jump out. Kay stood in the middle of the empty room, looking around for a path to freedom, but his gaze kept returning to the same thing, the closed doors. He tried to open them. He pushed, then pulled on the handle, but the doors were as solid as a wall. His heart was beating faster, his thoughts were becoming muddled, and his mind was becoming increasingly consumed with panic. Why can't it get out? Why doesn't it work? Step by step, he went to the window, hoping that there would be some way out. But there is only a dark landscape, thick and impenetrable, like the night itself. The reflection in the glass was distorted, as if he were looking at himself through thick glass or water. Kay didn't know how long he'd spent trying to find a way out, or how many times he'd already tried to open those damn doors. He was beginning to wonder if they made sense. What if this was all a trap? Someone is playing with it. But who? And why? Excitement surged through him, and his inner voice, the one that usually helped him make decisions, became uncertain. He tried to hold on, but the fear gradually took hold of him. The room grew smaller, the air more oppressive. "You need to get out of here," he whispered to himself, but even those words didn't bring any comfort. He cringed, feeling the threat grow, as if the walls were about to close around him. But it was impossible to stand still. He couldn't allow himself to succumb to that fear, couldn't allow the trap to close forever. He went back to the door, making up his mind. No matter what, he had to find a way out. The fear grew more palpable with each movement, but he knew one thing: if he didn't fight it, he was going to stay here. Chapter 4: The Horror. Kay finds her way out of the room and into the hallway. He sees that the walls are covered with blood and corpses. He realizes that he has entered a nightmare world where all his fears become reality. Kay breathed heavily as he stared at the massive metal door that had finally been pushed open. Before taking a step forward, he took one last look at the room where he had almost died, as if saying goodbye to her. There was no certainty, but there was no turning back. He gritted his teeth and took a step into the hallway. A dim light illuminated a narrow passageway that stretched out into the distance. The walls, which at first seemed featureless and cold, suddenly showed unmistakable stains. It was blood, fresh and blackening, thickly covering the surface of the walls. Its caked-on smell filled the air, making me feel sick and cold. Kay peered ahead, afraid to see what was waiting for him there. There were corpses on the floor. Misshapen, twisted bodies lay around like discarded dolls, forgotten in a hurry. Most of them had grimaces of horror on their faces, and some had tears on their faces, dried and mixed with blood. In the light, he could make out familiar features. Some of them he could see friends, relatives, and even himself. In this world, his nightmares took shape, materializing in eerie images. He walked on, trying not to look down, but the question kept running through his mind: what kind of place is this? Who could have created such a hell? The walls seemed alive, either because of the vague shadows, or because of the sounds that came from somewhere deep in the corridor: moans, scrapes and whispers. Kay felt the fear inside him grow with each step, filling every cell of his being. It seemed to him that space itself lived and breathed here, bending his fears to its will. Chapter 5. Kay tries to run away from her pursuers, but they are getting closer and closer. He realizes that he needs to find a weapon to defend himself. Kay took off, running down the corridor without making out his way. Cold fear pushed at his feet, making them move faster than ever. There were heavy footsteps behind him, not just sounds, but a menacing reminder that he was being hunted. He could feel something following him, breathing very close, catching his trail, not giving him the slightest chance of breathing again. The corridors took endless turns. Each turn seemed to lead him deeper into this nightmarish maze, where the walls seemed to close, leaving less room for escape. Thoughts raced through my head. I need something to fight back, thundered in his mind. The hero realized that one flight would not save him. He needs a gun. Glancing quickly around, he noticed that there was a small room at the end of the corridor, the door to which was ajar. Without wasting any time, the hero rushed towards her, bursting inside and slamming the door behind him. He leaned against her, holding his breath, trying to catch the sounds outside. His pursuers were getting closer, and the footsteps outside the door were getting quieter, but he knew it wouldn't last long. They were too close. In the dim light of the room, he looked around frantically for any weapons. On the table was a rusty knife, just a kitchen tool, with a blade stained with age. A metal pipe lay nearby. Without thinking, he grabbed both items was a knock outside the door. His pursuers were closing in. The hero's heart was racing, adrenaline blurring his mind. He slowly raised the trumpet, ready to strike the first blow as soon as they burst in, knowing that this might be his only chance.